Mr. Dan Perry, we can't ignore the latest development, not unrelated, the passing of Gorbachev, and you have some personal takes on that, and also perhaps a very evident dilemma by Western leaders whether to attend a funeral and pay their tribute or not risk boosting the current Russian strongman.
I mean, this is a very tragic situation all around that Gorbachev, an icon, a titan of the 20th century, has died, and he may not get a state funeral in Russia. I mean, he's despised, and Putin's supporters in Russia despise him especially. And even if Western leaders were allowed to go to Russia, I'm not so sure they would go, because that would perhaps be interpreted as a victory for Putin. But honestly, poor Gorbachev, I mean, I spent an hour or two with him about a decade ago. He was naive in many ways, but he wanted to yield a better Russia, a Russia of good karma, and we currently have a Russia of horrific karma, and it's almost sad that he spent his last months watching a real undoing of everything he had hoped to achieve. Never mind that he himself sort of blundered into the collapse of the Soviet Union. He hoped in his last months in power that the Soviet Union can be saved by improving it, and I can assure you, as someone who spent a lot of time in the former communist world, that idea was preposterous.
Is it the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning?
We seem to be in a war of attrition, and these things can last for a very long time when both sides are very motivated, and the question becomes which one of them is more susceptible to pressure. And I have to say, I think that's probably Zelensky, because he is not the dictator in this equation, and pressure may come because of the winter coming, which is going to affect not just the troops in the field, but especially Ukraine's allies in Europe.
Today we have the meeting in Prague and the statements from most of the leaders of the European Union countries that they are ready for the price that they need to pay in the next months.
Look, I have to say, first of all, on a question of what's happening on the ground, in a war situation, we need to pretty much discount what both sides are saying. I mean, Russia at this point is going to lie no matter what. That's the nature of that regime, and I think we just have to accept it. If they say one thing, it's more likely the opposite is true. In the case of Ukraine, I mean, what's the bigger motivation? Speaking the comprehensive truth, or winning the battle of hearts and minds and maybe creating a cloud of confusion and field for the Russians? Obviously the latter. So that's in terms of the information. As for your point, Hannah, look, of course I know that Ukrainians are more motivated, and the Russians don't know what on earth is going on. Their media is propaganda, and their brainwashing is massive, and they live under a criminal regime. That's clear. However, one of the basic unfairnesses of life in this world is that when you have a conflict of this nature, it's easier for the dictatorship. Putin doesn't have to take public opinion into account at all, and Zelensky does. I mean,
but even in Germany, I have seen an increased resolve. More and more people are willing to do what's required because they are so turned off by what the Putin regime has done. And actually, to their credit, the German government has figured out how to almost completely disconnect themselves from Russian gas. So another strategic failure by the Kremlin.
General, are you not concerned about the nuclear question? If Russia defeated too badly, might turn to threatening at least? Do you think they're bluffing when they talk about nukes?
Yeah, I do believe they're bluffing. Of course, they have thousands of nuclear weapons. They're dangerous, and I don't dismiss it, but I see no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon anywhere inside Ukraine. And I also think that while Putin is completely evil and should burn in hell forever, I don't think he's suicidal. And I don't think that the 70 or so oligarchs that are keeping him in power want to see him drive off the cliff either. So I just don't think it's feasible, as long as we're talking about a use of a nuclear weapon anywhere inside Ukraine.
It isn't clear to me if the oligarchs keep Putin in place or Putin keeps the oligarchs in place. But certainly they would hang together if they don't, they would hang apart if they don't hang together. I have to say, it's possible that the war will end with the overthrow of Putin. And, we're here to be analysts and not activists. It's conceivable, even if not desirable, that the pressure will grow on Ukraine to sue for peace, essentially. So we could go in a lot of different directions.
And
they still haven't figured out who's doing what. I would say that there is no significant threat of any sort of offensive going towards the Baltics. They need everything they've got just to hang on to what they have now in Ukraine?
General, if I may, I fully agree that it is unlikely, and they're overextended as is, and I don't think they're going to attack the Baltics rather. And it's pretty clear, though, that they have an interest in saber-rattling in order to scare the West into doing just what I claim is one of the scenarios, which is to desperately look for a way out, and that would involve pressuring Ukraine at this point. That said, Russia basically is run by one man. I don't think the 70 oligarchs you mentioned have that much of an influence at this point. The whim of Putin will drive a lot of this, and Putin clearly is running a satanic regime, and there's a scenario where the narrative is that he cannot afford to lose, and he's willing to burn down a house and have a tenth of all Russians die just in order to save face, which probably is necessary for him to stay in power and thus preserve his own life and that of his family. So this is a rather desperate situation where you have a deterministic environment surrounding one man. I'm not sure that I would agree with your approach to this whole situation, which is basically, I think, which is at the core containing the assumption that we're dealing with a rational player.